I wouldn't say I hate bugs. It's fascinating how such little creatures can contribute so much to the ecosystem, and some of them are even cute in their own way. Do you know that lots of wild bees have a favorite color? It's blue. Blue's my favorite color too. I know that there's a practical nectar harvesting reason for it, but I don't know, I think it's interesting to think about how I can have something in common with a bee. Sorry, I'm rambling. I guess I'm trying to avoid actually recounting what happened. Brendan loved bees. He told me once that his family used to call him Bumblebee when he was a kid, after the Transformer, but that little family nickname had sparked an interest in bees that for a while had him set on becoming an apiarist, and later inspired his band name. His bandmates always complained about burnt honey sounding too much like the name of a candle or a house paint color. I think they're changing it now. Sorry, I'm doing it again. Ignore this first part. I'll start over. Ever since the first time I saw a depiction of a worm in an apple, I've been paranoid about bugs in my food. It's specifically produce that I get anxious about. I've read all sorts of articles about the percentage of bugs that the FDA allows to be ground up into processed foods, and that only sort of bothers me. I can ignore the fact that apple butter is legally allowed to contain 5 whole insects per 100 grams, as long as I wouldn't be able to tell. It's one of those things that's gross to learn about, but ultimately not so gross that it deters me from more loosely controlled foods like jam or natural peanut butter. But produce is a different story. I can't even think about those viral pictures of spiders found in banana bunches without getting dizzy. Every time I eat a fruit or a vegetable with any kind of layers or crevices, anything that an insect could burrow into and hide in, I have to take it apart and check it thoroughly for bugs. I'd gotten teased a bit for this habit in grade school, and because of it my parents were compelled to have me tested for ADHD and OCD, the former of which I have, though that and my food paranoia aren't related. Mostly, it wasn't much of an issue. I just ate slower than most people. I'd never found a bug in any of the food I'd picked apart, but that did very little to ease the worry that something could be hiding among the seeds of a pepper or inside an olive. Brendan was one of the only people I'd ever been friends with that didn't make some little comment about my eating habits. I didn't really care that much when people did, but it did get frustrating when people's immediate response to my explanation was to tell me some story about something disturbing they'd found in a food product once, as if that would do me any good. But Brendan never mentioned it. I think that's one of the things I liked most about him when we first met. He wasn't a disinterested person, but he was always very casual about little oddities and respected people's privacy. He and I met through a mutual friend in high school, and since he was one of the only other people in my suburb of a town that was into alt metal, we already had some common ground, and we were fast friends. Throughout senior year, he was at my house more often than he was at his own, and when we moved out for college, it just sort of made sense to live together. So the summer after graduation, he and I rented a shitty one-story with Lainey, the drummer for their band, and Mike, Lainey's brother, and their bassist. Our living arrangement worked out really well. We didn't live in the best part of town, and we got the occasional gruff neighbor or noise complaint, but I was never really bothered by living with a new metal band. I kept to myself most of the time, and usually had my headphones in, so honestly I hardly noticed when they'd rehearse or have people over, and the others got along well enough. Rent was cheap, it wasn't far to campus, and I always had the option to tag along to Burnt Honey's gigs if I wanted something to do on weekends. All in all, it was the perfect living arrangement, and freshman year was one of the best of my life. I probably should have mentioned this up front, but despite being sort of part of the local metal and punk scenes, and, well, looking the part with my long hair and studded and patched attire, kind of straight edge. It's not a moral thing so much for me, just a personal preference. Alcohol never really interested me, and the 2 times I'd smoked weed, I'd gotten so freaked out thinking about all the little things that could have been living hidden in the clusters of underground buds that it pretty much turned me off from the idea of any substances altogether. I'm only mentioning this because it's important that you know that this next part wasn't a bad trip or whatever. I really wish it had been, but it wasn't. October was usually busy for local music because most small venues had a bit of a dip in attendance through the winter. There were usually a couple of shows a week going on at established venues, and Burnt Honey was gaining a bit of a base then, so their schedule was pretty packed. When Brendan got sick the day before one of their bigger gigs, the house got pretty tense. Brendan clearly wasn't well enough to go on, but Lainey was pushing him to suck it up for the sake of the band. I thought at first he'd just caught the flu, but when he brought his blanket to curl up on the floor of the bathroom between spewing his guts, I figured he had food poisoning, and pretty bad, too. I tried to argue on his behalf, but Lainey was already too upset to be reasoned with, and she ended up more or less storming out to go bar hop. Mike assured me that she'd cool off soon and invited me to go along with them, but I told them I'd stay home and keep an eye on Brendan in case he needed someone to take him to a merge or something. When Mike went out to join Lainey, I brought Brendan his laptop, a bottle of water, and some Gravol, and told him to holler if he needed anything. He smiled and assured me he was fine with a thumbs up, but he looked like death. Whatever he had, it was nasty, and though I was fairly certain that what he had was probably bacterial as opposed to viral, I was still a bit worried about catching it, so I kept a bit of a distance and headed back to my room, planning to check on him in a little while. I'll admit, I got a bit distracted for a while, and I lost track of time. When I noticed I'd been holed up in my room for nearly 2 hours, I instantly felt guilty that I'd left my very sick friend alone on the floor of our bathroom, laptop or no, and got up to go back to check on him. When I took off my headphones, I noticed the muffled sound of music playing, which wasn't uncommon at our place. It was something from an early Chevelle album. I don't listen to them anymore. The music was cranked pretty high, and it didn't take me long after stepping out of my room to figure out that it was coming from the bathroom door, which was now closed. I walked up and gave a courtesy knock and a, "Hey, dude, you okay?" before trying the handle. It was locked. I waited for a second and listened, but there was no response. I knocked again, called out again, louder this time in case he couldn't hear me over the music, but again I got no answer. A cold pang of anxiety ran through my chest. Maybe he just couldn't hear me, but maybe something was wrong, really wrong. I kept banging on the door and shouting for a solid minute, getting nothing in return before I started to panic. I'm not a very big guy, but I've been in a few rough spots before. I can hold my own in a fight, but I'd never tried knocking down a door before. I yelled for Brendan to get out of the way of the door if he was even still conscious to hear me, and then I tried holding the knob and throwing my weight against it like I'd seen in movies. But that did fuck all, even on our flimsy doors. After another minute of that, I tried with a running start from the opposite side of the hall, but all that did was make a tiny dent in the wood and hurt my shoulder pretty bad. That time, I had shifted the door pretty far in the frame, though, and in that moment a trace of a rancid, sour smell seeped out. Even the small whiff I'd gotten was enough to make me gag. I was really panicked now. It was hard to think in my panic and with all that fucking music from the other side of the door, but it finally occurred to me that I could just take off the knob. I ran across the house to the garage we used for storage and pushed past the rehearsal equipment the others had set up there to where we kept our measly collection of communal tools. I never felt stupider for not owning a screwdriver. After a few seconds, I picked up our rusty hammer and ran back towards the bathroom. Gripping the hammer in both hands and swinging it down as hard as I could from above my head, I struck the doorknob again and again, first just denting it, but after a few solid hits, the wood holding it began to splinter. It was hard to aim well with my injured shoulder, but after what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to knock the knob off most of the way, ripping it away from the door with the back of the hammer and tearing at the last clinging bits of wood with my hands. I barely noticed the splinters as I tossed the knob to the floor and pushed the door open as soon as it would move. Immediately, an intense wave of that rotten, sour smell washed over me, so strong it made my eyes water. I barely kept from throwing up as I stepped across the threshold and immediately slipped. I half caught myself against the door frame, the sudden pain shooting through my injured shoulder not enough to divert my attention away from what I had slipped on and was now seeping into my jeans. I think the only thing that kept me from vomiting was pure shock. The floor was absolutely covered in a pool of dark blood, high enough that it looked like it had been just about to crest the divider between the tile and the hallway carpet under the door. But it wasn't just blood. There were chunks, organic, irregular chunks ranging from the size of a coin to the size of a softball, nearly floating in the mess of blood and other fluids that I didn't even want to try to identify. I don't remember if I screamed. I don't think I did. The heavy guitar and vocals blaring from Brendan's laptop sent small ripples through the flood, echoing from inside the shower, nearly deafening but not loud enough to cover up the sound of wet, tearing flesh. Across from the door, under the open bathroom window, was something I see every time I close my eyes but still have trouble describing. Crouched over Brendan's blanket, a nearly unrecognizable lump of red-soaked fabric at this point, was something just as covered in blood. It looked almost human, roughly my size, but it was wrong. Human fingers can't be that long, can't move like snakes the way its did. Human spines can't fold over that way. Human eyes can't dilate that much. Human mouths can't open that wide. Its skin was a rotted gray, and its long hair hung down across its face, getting tangled between its rows and rows of jagged teeth, all in various colors and stages of rot. So crowded, it looked like new teeth kept pushing the rows forward until they couldn't be contained within its blackened lips, dripping with cloudy, bloody saliva, and laid out across its knees was Brendan, or what was left of him. Brendan's limp body was torn crudely open from chin to navel, his shredded clothes pasted to his body with blood. His head hung down at a sharp angle, his eyes missing, and the sockets peeled open, every hole on his face roughly torn and peeled back. The thing holding him had its two long hands buried in his exposed guts, digging around with those two long fingers, those fingers with far too many joints that snaked around, searching and grasping and tearing at the viscera laid out before it, picking out chunks of various sizes and inspecting them quickly before tossing them into the pool with sickening splashes. It definitely saw me, but it didn't seem to care that I was there. It didn't pause its rummaging for even an instant in the infinite seconds that I half sat frozen in the doorway, unable to move or yell or do anything. Its dilated eyes watched me for a moment, looking almost curious as it ripped something the size of my fist out from under Brendan's ribcage and tossed it casually towards me. It landed at my feet with a wet thump, and the reflex that took over to pull myself back from the subsequent splash was what finally got me moving. I scrambled backwards on hands and feet, hitting my wrist hard against the discarded hammer on the floor. I didn't even think to grab it, to try and do anything to attack this thing, to avenge my friend. When I hit the wall, all I could do was push myself up unsteadily to my feet, and even that took a couple of tries. As I did, I watched the thing use both its hands to peel something inside Brendan's torso apart, dig inside it for a moment before slowly and carefully pulling out a long, pale, writhing worm, shaking the blood off of it and holding it aloft to examine it for a moment before crushing it in a knotted fist and tossing it aside. The worst part, I think, was the fact that I understood then. I knew exactly what it was doing. It was taking him apart to check him for bugs. When I got my legs under me, I turned and I ran. No matter how guilty I feel about it, I know I couldn't have done anything else. I ran out the front door in my socks and my blood-soaked jeans, hands still full of splinters. I don't remember where I went. I just needed to get as far away from the house as possible. I had frostbite when the cops finally picked me up after someone noticed me wandering around and called 911. You've probably heard the rest. The investigation, the trial, it's all anyone seems to care about around here. The reason I'm finally giving my story to one of you journalists is because I'm fucking tired of seeing all those conspiracy theories people are posting everywhere online, that we were all in some kind of cult, that it was planned, that Lainey and Mike and I sacrificed Brendan to Satan or whatever. I didn't kill Brendan. He was my best friend. I didn't kill him. I saw what did, but I couldn't tell you what the fuck it was. All I know is that I see it every time I sleep, every time I blink, and that it was real. It was real. The blood was there, all Brendan's. The chunks of my best friend were there on the floor of my bathroom. It was there. I saw it. The police saw it. It was there. But it wasn't the only thing they found. I'm sure you know all about it. It's the detail all the media outlets and true crime blogs and occult fanatics are obsessed with. The reason I spent a month locked up, and also, ironically, what proved my innocence in the end. They never found the rest of Brendan's body. What they did find at the scene of the crime were teeth, all different colors and in different stages of rot, that all matched my dental records.